Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us here, everybody. I'm Brian McElhatton. Let's go inside Utah politics now, shall we? We're tracking Utah Senate race by talking one-on-one with a very long list of candidates. And joining us today is Trent Staggs, the mayor of Riverton. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Brian.
So glad you're here because I'm curious, you have been a city council member.
Yes.
Now you're the mayor. How would you translate the experience and such the most local of local politics into a Senate career?
Oh, well, I think that's a fantastic question, and we've been talking about it for a long time on the campaign trail. And I think being in this position as a mayor, understanding local governance, that's what our founders envisioned. And they thought that, look, we have few and defined roles the federal government should be doing. Everything else left to the states and to the people. And so I say nobody understands that better than a mayor. I think it's the most accountable, perhaps the most transparent elected office. I'm always out there meeting with my constituents. And so someone who understands that local government, and I've been pushing back against federal, state, and county overreach for 10, now going on 11 years. That's what we need back in D.C.
I want to ask you about an issue that's so important to all of Utahns. This is one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. It's expensive everywhere. It's expensive. This place in particular has been hit hard over the past few years. If you were to be elected to the Senate, what do you think your role could be? What do you think the federal role could be to help us find solutions to this problem here?
Yeah, well, I've advocated for many in my mayoral role, but at the federal level, one of the biggest issues we have in the state is that the federal government owns or controls 2/3 of our state. I mean, it's really incomprehensible when you compare it to other states across the union.
It's a big landholder here.
It is. And so when you have such a constrained and limited footprint upon which you can build, that exacerbates the issue. And I think Senator Mike Lee has really been out there leading, has different ideas about how we can develop certain areas of federal lands that are developable.
Maybe some BLM land we're talking
absolutely,
about?
Yeah. Absolutely. And that could help out, I think, tremendously in taking off some of the pressures that we've seen with respect to housing.
Mm-hmm. I know we've seen the governor and his push for, I think, 35,000 new starter homes here. $350,000 and under is the price range he's aiming for. That's a local solution there. Yeah. Other than maybe making federal land available, what other policies would you support or would you push for that could help Utahns just afford to live?
Yeah, well, I think there are many at the local level, and that's what we've been advocating for. I've been pushing back. I think, unfortunately, we've seen many that want to push down higher densities and just populate certain areas with high-density housing, and I've been pushing back against that. We need better infrastructure. That's also something on the federal side that we can do. We need to be able to connect our various areas of the state more just in a better way. And that's something that we can definitely do with respect to infrastructure so that we're building out more broadly across the state and not focusing just on along the Wasatch Front and thinking everything has to be packed into this area. But locally, I mean, there's many different things that I've advocated for. I think, the illegal immigration issue definitely takes a toll on the housing availability here. You have the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity that I think is importing tens of thousands of people, jobs that are coming from outside the state. These people are of immediate home buying age and they're putting a lot of pressures on the housing market. So those are things, and I think also I've called out Wall Street landlords. I mean, the Utah Association of Realtors has said that about 16 to 20% or more of our single family homes are actually owned by corporate interests. And so, if you ended up putting that much more supply into the housing market, readily available for individuals and families to purchase, that is also going to help out with the issue. So those few policy changes, I think, would go a long way in terms of making the supply of housing more readily available.
You mentioned immigration, right? And there, I see two issues right now, and I want to address both of them if we have time. There's securing the border, which we're hearing a lot about right now, a lot of people coming across the border, a lot of people being apprehended. Yeah. And then we have the system itself, the immigration system. It can take 10 years for someone to apply and go through the system legally. Let's start there. Where do you see the problem in the immigration system as it stands, and what would you do to try to make it more efficient if that's where you want to tackle that?
Absolutely. I've conducted so many town halls. I've been in this race the longest, out of anybody. We announced my candidacy back in May. We were the only ones willing to take on the establishment and take on, challenge Mitt Romney. He hadn't decided whether he was going to seek re-election or not. And so we've been at this a long time, and I've probably done 70, 80 town halls across the state. And I've heard from those folks who may have their spouse maybe somebody from another country who has immigrated here. They're trying to do it the right way, but unfortunately it's taken 12 or 13 years. They've paid tens of thousands of dollars to immigration attorneys. That's not right. If somebody wants to come to this country and actually, pledge allegiance to that flag, they want to assimilate, become a part of our culture, we should be able to do that much more quickly than 12 to 13 years and have to pay all this money to immigration attorneys. But first and foremost, I mean, with respect to border security, we've got to secure the border. And it worked under President Trump. And that's why I've been so, first one to endorse President Trump. I went out last summer and said we need his strength back in office because he had policies that worked. Build the border wall, remain in Mexico policy, I think E-Verify, ensuring that all these benefits aren't made available to illegal immigrants, because there's a big magnet that magnetizes so many folks here, and that's something that we can address and should work at the federal level, but also in conjunction with various states to ensure that they have policies that are not magnetizing folks, but rather encouraging them to go through a more orderly process to become a citizen here. Now,
President Trump, of course, one of his big tent poles there on immigration and border security was building that wall, and it was not completed. We know that. There are sections of it in place right now. If you were to take office, would you support the completion of that wall?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we've had politicians in D.C. that are more concerned about Ukraine's borders than our own. More concerned with borders in other countries than our own. We're looking at about $5 billion to finish that wall. We need to. It works. Look at what's going on in Texas. And that, Brian, that's the biggest issue that I see in this race. We need people that have demonstrated the resolve and the ability to push back against the establishment. We need those people representing us in D.C., not people that are just going to go back there and become part of the establishment. And that's typified my career, whether in business or whether in the last 10, 11 years in elected office for Riverton. I've always been willing to stand up and push back, and whether that's the only one running, being willing to challenge Mitt Romney in this race before he decided not to seek re-election, rejecting lockdowns and mask and vaccine mandates as a mayor, fighting against ESG, inappropriate materials in school, the high-density housing issue that we've talked about that I've been leading on. So many issues where I've stood up and pushed back against the establishment. That's what we need. Somebody's going to go back there with Mike Lee and give us a true constitutional conservative. Utah deserves that. We deserve to have another constitutional conservative.
Let me ask you again, you said $5 billion roughly to finish the border wall. Where does that money come from? I think President Trump, he took the money from the Pentagon. That was some defense money that he used. Right. Where would you take where would you want that to come from, the $5 billion to finish the wall?
Well, that's something that I think there are plenty of things that we could do. I mean, we're funding so many different programs right now. I mean, the UN, for example, is $16 billion, and I've been advocating defunding the UN. There's a lot of areas in D.C. that we can look to cut. The Department of Education, for example, is $80 billion a year. And on my website for the past 10, 11 months, I've been campaigning. I've said we should be getting rid of the Federal Department of Education. There's no constitutional directive for it. We should leave everything to the states and to parental control, because I say parental control isn't just priority A, it's priority A through Z. And so there's just a few examples, but we've got to have people that go back there that have the courage and are willing to take on the establishment and find those areas where we can cut, because $34+ trillion in debt, this is out of control. When I launched my campaign, we were at $32 trillion in debt. It's a huge issue. I've had to balance my budget every year, 10, 11 years now, running my community. DC seems to think they're exempt from that. And we've got to have folks that have that experience, that have actually balanced budgets, that have run a payroll, that can go back there and work with our Republican caucus to get something done. So we really have to have President Trump back in office, and we have to have true conservatives, America First patriots that are going to go back there and work for we the people. And that's why we had Senator Tommy Tuberville out here recently, only one in the race that has a sitting U.S. senator that's endorsed my candidacy. And that's what he talked about. He said, Trent, right now we've got 15 to 18 Republicans that are part of the steering committee, which is kind of the equivalent of the Freedom Caucus on the House side. We need at least a half a dozen more. And he said, I'm the one in this race. He's vetted everybody. I'm the one that he is assured will go back there and be able to stand up to the cabal and the establishment in D.C., and he's got about another 6 or 7 other folks across the country that he's trying to get elected that will really go back there and be able to make a difference.
Okay, Trent Staggs, Mayor of Riverton, we appreciate your time today. Wish we could talk more. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, still